Hi everyone, it's William here after 2 days of silence, back with the Grand Duke Dmitri video series, and we're going to finish up the Karalli material today. Not everything that Dmitri has to say about Karalli, that will come later in his 1917 diary, but for the moment, we're in the summer, December 1916, with what she had to say about the Rasputin assassination. And we won't be comparing it to what he had to say, because we'll be getting to that later. But right now, just what she has to say. And before doing that, I want to let you know where this material comes from. So if you go to, let's see, HTTP, the usual stuff, sergeyvfomin.livejournal.com. That's where these were posted. That was some time ago, but it's still up. It's still there. And here's what Mr. Fomin wrote. Here is some new material provided by one of my visitors, ZZ, the never-before-published recollections of V.A. Karalli about the circumstances of her introduction to Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. It's actually not a memoir in the true sense of the word, but a series of letters presenting sometimes extensive memories of her past. Some of these letters, which are now in the Bakrushin Museum in Moscow, were recently published in St. Petersburg in a specialized small circulation publication, Vera Karalli, Life Through the Prism of Time, based on materials from the funds of the A.A. Bakrushin State Central Theater Museum, pages of ballet history, new research and materials, and that's from 1939. And he then writes, judging by the indicated gaps, the text was subjected to significant redactions by its publisher, made according to principles that are not entirely clear. All right, so that is referring to this part about Rasputin. We didn't have those redactions in the earlier part about how Karalli and Dmitri got together. So, at some point, I suppose I'll pursue that to see if I can find out what was redacted. Meanwhile, our recap from last time, well, what did we find out overall from Karalli about Dmitri? We found out a little bit about how a Grand Duke went about acquiring a mistress, so that was interesting. We heard the usual story about how all the women who had, not all, but some of the women who had relationships with Dmitri, almost always, later on, claimed that he had been madly in love with them. And Felix Yusupov, of course, made that claim that Dmitri had been madly in love with his cousin Irina. But that Yusupov, as a rival suitor, had actually won her hand. And I just don't buy any of it. But anyway, four that I thought were interesting about Dmitri personally that rang true to me. Well, the first one I have no knowledge about was that he always walked with a sway, according to her, whatever that meant, and I don't know why that would be, that he was a very caustic, sarcastic person, and that it made people angry, but that underneath the surface he was quite a melancholic type, and I think, we've seen that consistently. And also just that he was lonely. He according to her, he asked his cousin Gavril and Gavril's mistress Nina to find him someone who could be like a kind of wife for him without, there being any question of actual marriage. So anyway, that's the recap. And here is the excerpt about Rasputin, and I will let you know where things are redacted. So here we go. This is in Karalli's voice. After rehearsal, I went to Dmitri's place, of course. He had come in his car to pick me up, redacted apart. That evening was a little overshadowed by worry about an upcoming event. A letter needed to be written to Rasputin in a female hand. I carried out that task. Naturally, I wore gloves and altered my handwriting. That was necessary in order to avoid leaving traceable clues. But youth will be youth, and we intermittently played the fool, joking, laughing, throwing pillows at each other. There were lots of them on the sofas. Happy youth, how full it is of beauty and irrepressible joy. Redacted. I needed to drop the letter off, and then I went home to the hotel. Dee sent a car for me early the next morning and then gave me a detailed account of what had happened. Things didn't go the way they were supposed to. By that time, Yusupov, redacted, had given an official explanation for why there had been shooting at his house. That, of course, worried us very much, because if D were to be asked, he wouldn't know what to say, since he didn't know what Yusupov had said, redacted. Yusupov finally arrived, and we breathed a sigh of relief, redacted. Yusupov had come to inform us that D had been at his house, had been drunk, and had gone out into the yard and shot at a fleeing dog. So when she says that Yusupov had come to inform us, she means, of course, that that was the story, not that Dmitri had necessarily actually done those things, but that that was the story that he had given to the investigators. And so Dmitri should give the same one. So yeah, what to make of this, and how does it jibe with other accounts of the assassination and the prelude and aftermath of the assassination? Well, I mean, it generally does. I didn't go back and refresh my memory on that from any of the books or texts that I have relevant to Rasputin, but nothing sort of jumps out at me as being, implausible. I find it very interesting, her emphasis on the fact that they were taking pains to make sure that they wouldn't be caught. So when she wrote this letter, so if you recall, the setup was that Irina Yusupova was supposed to be the bait to get Rasputin had wanted to meet her, and the promise was that if he came to the Yusupov palace, he would indeed be introduced to her. And so I assume that that's the letter that Vera Karalli was writing. And she notes that she wore gloves specifically to avoid leaving traceable clues, as she puts it. And then at the end, we have Dmitri and Felix anxious to coordinate their stories. So, this was a political assassination, but it differs from a lot of political assassinations in that, well, maybe not a lot, I'm not an expert, but the participants did not want it to be known who had done it. They were not making a statement about it. Now, according to Purishkevich, that went a little bit wrong at the end, because he went out. There was a policeman who'd heard the shots, and he went out and proclaimed, "We have just killed Grigory Rasputin." He was a right-wing politician in the Duma, kind of a rabble-rouser, and he went out and made that declaration and wanted it to be very clear. Yusupov apparently then went around talking about the whole thing in the few days afterwards while he and Dmitri were still at liberty. And yeah, that was on the one hand. Maybe it was more Dmitri, I don't know, but they didn't want, they were taking some precautions so that it wouldn't be known who had done it. And this reminds me again of a scene in 1921, or was it actually rather 1920, where Dmitri and Felix, even though they already are estranged and there are hard feelings between them, they nonetheless get together in order, once again, to coordinate their stories. Again, people are interested in this and wanting to know what went on, and Felix wanted to talk about it, Dmitri didn't want to talk about it, but at any rate, he felt a pressing need to make sure that he and Yusupov, again, if they had to talk about it or did talk about it, would be telling the same story. And in this case, everybody knew who did it, but he wanted to make sure, I guess, that even though there was no longer any question of who did it, that nonetheless they were presenting a united front. And Felix, according to him, did agree to that. Anyway, we'll get to that when we're in 1920. But they're already tied into the forensics of the day with fingerprints and that sort of thing. So we have this instance of what Karalli calls playing the fool on the right before the assassination. What is it, the day before, throwing couch cushions at each other and sort of behaving like 12-year-olds. So, make of that what you will. Irrepressible joy and beauty, happy youth, so on and so forth. Okay, so I guess this was the day of the assassination. And then she went home to the hotel she was staying in, and the next morning Dmitri sends his car to pick her up and brings her to the palace, and his palace, that is, and tells her what happened. And, we'll see. I think, if I recall correctly, he says in his diaries that she was there already at his palace, along with Laming, that she and Laming were waiting up for him. I could be wrong about that, but when we get to his diary entries about it, his recollections of it, and he wrote, detailed recollections of it, in 1916, in December 1917, he in his diaries wrote about, what had happened that night. And I thought he said that she was there waiting for him at home when he got back. One thing, that she was not at the Yusupov Palace. There's been some speculation about that, but according to her and according to him, she was not there. She was either waiting for him at his home, or she came soon thereafter. And, as you'll see, he talks about having a real breakdown that night when he got back, being just in a horrible state of mind, and that Laming managed to get him through it. So anyway, we'll come to all that. And yeah, that's about it, really. Dmitri was such a dog lover that it's hard for me to picture him shooting a dog, even though they were drunk. I think that's an accurate thing. Yusupov makes that claim in his book about Rasputin, that Dmitri actually did shoot a dog so that there would be blood on the, there would be an excuse for why there was blood on the snow, why there were gunshots, so on and so forth. But I don't think Purishkevich makes that claim in his account. Personally, I think Purishkevich's is the most accurate. So, I don't know. I hate to think that he did that he shot a dog, and he was such a dog. As I say, I'm a dog lover, so it's bad enough that he liked to shoot crows. Anyway, yeah, for what it's worth, that is what Karalli had to say about it. And their relationship, as you know, would not resume once he was banished to Persia, although they did reconnect with each other later. Okay, so what do we have next time? Well, I think, I've been looking through things and trying to figure that out, what to do next time, because I have the diary entries from 1917 beginning in September. What I was looking for was my letters that Dmitri wrote to his father in January 1917, which are fascinating. They were published in the 20s in Krasny Archiv. a historical, what would you call it? It was they called it an archive, the Red Archive, but it was published for the public. So I couldn't find those in my files, so I maybe don't have them on my computer, and I'd have to hunt for them in my physical files instead of my computer files. So I may just go ahead and start with the 1917 diaries while I'm looking for those, and I basically know where they are. The other possibility is to go back to Dmitri's letters that he wrote between 1908 and 1911 to his sister. So are the letters that he wrote to Nicholas between 1911 and 1914, but I would have to hunt for those. Anyway, yeah, come back tomorrow and find out. And in the meantime, you can always let me know what your preferences are. So I'll hopefully see you then. Bye.